almost 15 past. So we can begin. And welcome everybody to our February HUS meeting. We have something completely different this time, which I'm really happy about. We've been trying to set the date for this presentation for quite a long time. And now I'm really happy to introduce Suvi, Tuominen and Marko, Marila, and art and archaeological methods, as I always state your lecture, glitches, disruptions, and material re-articulations. I suppose you're going to explain all this to us today.
Yeah.
Before I let you start, there's a small announcement. We're not going to have a HUS lecture in April.
In March?
No, or in March. Yes, it's not March yet. All right, sorry. We're going to have it in April, not in March. But there's actually something else going on, because there's Helsinki Club on the very date we were supposed to have our lecture, which is Friday, 27th of March, and the time is actually the very same that we have here. So it's from 4 o'clock onwards. It's not here, but it's in the A building of Tovelia, very nearby, and this is for the whole faculty of, or the Department of Cultures. And they have a topic called Emigrants for Empire, the planning of Finnish settler colonies in British and American imperial borderlands from 1899 to 1905. So this could be nice for some of you. So check their page, Health Culture Club, and instead of HUS, that's something that's going on in March. But now, let's return back to the topic of art and archaeology, and Marko and Suvi, please.
Thanks, Maria. So maybe we start by introducing ourselves and the positions from which we come from and speak from. And so I have studied archaeology here at Helsinkiuni, and I graduated last year in early spring. And my thesis project was about choreography and archaeology, and especially about choreography as an archaeological method. And the thesis project itself, especially the written part, was kind of trying to trace some parallels between the ontology of choreography and theory of archaeology, especially recent discourses taking place in archaeology. And currently I'm studying another master's at the University of Arts, Helsinki, in the Live Art and Performance Studies program, and I still continue my art archaeology research there. And maybe Marko.
Yes, I'm a PhD student here in archaeology. I'm chiefly an archaeologist, not an artist, but art as such and the methodology of art, or artistic methods, and they somehow resonate with what I have studied. I just defended my PhD last week on speculation in archaeology, and I see art as a form of speculation when it comes to archaeology, as not so much an art. So that's my background: philosophy of archaeology and archaeological theory. And so my background and my role when it comes to art and archaeology, you could kind of take it as someone who flirts with art as an archaeologist. So
yeah, and maybe from that my role is maybe then more and as an artist who flirts with archaeology. Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
But we have been collaborating with Suvi quite a lot when it comes to art and archaeology, and we will show you a couple of examples of such collaboration, and so we will proceed so that Suvi, you will first tell us what art and archaeology have to do with each other. I will then present a case from my own art archaeological oeuvre, so to say, and then we will hear one of Suvi's. No, that's actually more of a collaboration.
Yeah.
So yeah, and you take the stage after I have showed my stuff. So
yeah.
Should we start with your thing?
And at any time, the space is very fluid. So if you need to go to the toilet while we are speaking, it's fine. You can do that, and if not, then don't. and also, if you have any questions while we are presenting, it's good to raise your hand, and also if you want to elaborate on something. And of course, at the end, we will have a time for discussion and so forth. Yeah, so like you already see that the theme is indeed an introduction to art archaeological methods. So it won't be an exhaustive presentation per se, where we would kind of trace the whole history of art archaeologies. And there are some specific concepts that have emerged from this field, and the glitches, disruptions, and material re-articulations are some of them. And I hope that at the end of the presentation it will make sense, at least for some of you maybe. But let's see. So. As you see, a dear child can have many names, eli rakkaalla lapsella on monta nimeä, or many forms of how it's written at least. So kind of like the arts and archaeology, I try to create this grid-like image that presents different types of spaces and branches that are emergent from this interdisciplinary space, and Sir Mortimer Wheeler is behind there as a ghost-like presence. And what is common with all of these forms of how the art archaeology is written is that they signify a kind of space where the interface between art and archaeology is intensified in different manners, and then when the presentation goes further, it will slowly unfold what this could mean. So yeah, art and archaeology, archaeology, art slash archaeology, art-archaeology, the arts in plural, and archaeology are some of the written forms you might encounter in literature. And the commonality of these different kind of conceptual assemblages is that the space to which they refer to are kind of spaces where questions, issues, concerns, critical and theoretical insights, and also material articulations of both art and archaeology somehow come together or mingle. And somehow this space also, though it's very grid-like presented here, it's also ever expanding, open-ended, somewhat also vague space, and plural. And the notion of or the emphasis on creativity is usually connected with writings about art archaeology and the nurture of creativity and care for creativity. And I propose here in this image that because such interdisciplinary space exists or have come to exist, and also already Ian Hodder, archaeological theorist, maybe familiar to some of you, once put it that archaeology somehow straddles the gulf that separates the arts from the sciences. And due to this straddling, there has been also possibility for emergent new projects that I present here, some of them. Theater archaeology, archaeography, performance archaeology, and poetic archaeology. And some of these projects have some connection, like historically, or if we try to contextualize it in the history of archaeology, so they have a connection with the post-processual thought. So the wide range of new ideas that post-processual archaeologists promoted in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s played an important role in questions regarding representation, performance, and intersubjectivity in archaeology. And therefore art, or like artistic methods, came into play and were discussed, for example, as means in archaeology in terms of their interpretive approach to the world. And art archaeology started to work quite well together within this paradigm of postmodern thought, where the process of recontextualization and archaeological imagination took place, as you might or have encountered the archaeological imagination. Is it called the book?
You mean Shanks?
Shanks, yeah.
Yes.
So somewhat the space of the arts came into play there. And I will just present some of these branches. So kind of, you could consider them kind of as methods, but it's quite tricky, this whole notion of what is a method and so forth. So, but you will see later on why it's tricky in these cases. So theater archaeology was a project together with archaeologist Michael Shanks and performance artist Mike Pearson. And then the project developed into this very interesting publication around a possible theater archaeology methodology, and it was published in 2001. And theater archaeology is, and now I quote what Shanks proposes on his website, that theater archaeology is the re-articulation of fragments of past as real-time events. Theater archaeology offers provocative models for the future of the archive, another live focus of contemporary art and the archaeological imagination. We, meaning Shanks and Pearson, directly address the character of documentation of event, site, and artifact in performed practice. We propose that assemblage is one of archaeologists' constituting practices. In the animated archive, where traces and remains of the past are treated not as datum, but as active resources in the mobilization of the past in the present, and for future purpose, end quote. So kind of the project attempted to propose site specificity and especially site-specific performance practice as a means in re-articulating and recreating or connecting the past in and with the present. And somehow this project I run into a publication in a recent landscape dramaturgy, and this was referenced there. So it's quite interesting how the archaeology also proposes methodologies to dramaturgy. And then the other example, you see here the pictures are from a project that Christopher Tilley and Sue Hamilton and Barbara Bender did together between 1995 and 1999 on a late Neolithic and early Bronze Age settlement on Leskernik Hill. And the project itself had many different aspects to it, and its methods varied from this kind of more artistic ones to archaeological field survey and excavation and to geological research. And from this particular project and in connection with the site specificity and performance, I wanted to highlight this gesture that you see in the images. And this gesture was where Tilley, Hamilton and Bender wrapped stones on Leskernik Hill with various materials. So they wrapped the stones with different fabrics and things. And then this the gesture has been conceptualized in their article, Art and the Representation of the Past from 2000 with the following words, and I quote, "As archaeologists, we find the cairn. How can we inscribe that process of collecting, selecting, choosing, timing, placing? One response we had to the stones was to wrap them. In doing this, we were acknowledging and making tangible our actions within, reactions to, and interpretations of Leskernik's stony landscape, and the possible significance of these stones to its prehistoric inhabitants. The process of wrapping served to energize the stones with our ideas and thoughts. In doing this, it clearly mattered which stones we wrapped and where. We wrapped stones of particular shapes, triangular, whaleback, and pyramidal stones." End quote. And also in the publication, Tilley, Hamilton, and Bender also highlight this type of somatic engagement that they had with the stones while wrapping them, and how the stones affected also their perception of the site and the landscape in which the stones kind of dwelt. Then one other kind of contextualization of what archaeological methods could be is the archaeography project also by Shanks. And this is something I will shortly introduce, but as you know, as archaeologists, the photography is quite remarkable action in the practice of archaeology. And in this project, Shanks occupies kind of the space between photography as a practice and archaeology, and combines them into this archaeography project. And Shanks has conceptualized this practice and the emergence of it with the following words, and I quote, "As a skeptical young archaeologist back in the early 1980s, I was fascinated by the connections between archaeology and photography. In archaeology's project of documenting the remains of the past, skeptical, I thought, and still do, that archaeology's long links with the identity politics of nationalism and colonialism and its role in the growing heritage industry called for ideology critique. The careful and savvy dissection of the roots of secure archaeological knowledge under the suspicion that the past is most often invoked not to enlighten, but to support partisan interest in the present," end quote. So the willingness of kind of exploring this critical space between photography and archaeology as also a creative space for practicing this kind of critical thought or practicing of frustration towards some hegemonies of knowledge. But this project you can find on Shanks' website as well. and I will proceed very fast, so Marko then has more time to present also. Then performance archaeology. This is actually something that could mean basically anything. But I wanted to present a particular project that I encountered in Facebook, and because it's slightly more connected with also community archaeology, and maybe it's important to some of you. So in this particular project, the space between archaeology and performance practices are also seen as place where community archaeology can creatively exist in different shapes and forms. And this project I recommend you can search online. And then slightly more from the kind of arts side or artistic researchers side, what is the performance of archaeology? And as I kind of see it, the performance of archaeology in the arts can also refer to this kind of appropriation of archaeology into performance practice. And thus the archaeology becomes kind of like a metaphor in the artistic project, or the way in which the artists use archaeology in a very specific and sometimes even stereotypical manner to emphasize certain aesthetics or mindscapes. And here you see Mark Gion's archaeology project with this curiosity cabinet aesthetics. And then a documentary science fiction film, very recent, done by Matthew Wilson, called Geological Evidences, and that's also partially filmed on an archaeological dig, and in order to comment this kind of notion of a post-apocalyptic landscape where then archaeologists enter in the far future. So also I recommend to check these projects out. Then as a final kind of branch of art archaeology, I will introduce poetic archaeology shortly. So for me, this poetic archaeology is somewhat more like a conceptual project, and it shares some similarity with, for example, Shanks and Pearson regarding the kind of recontextualization, or actually the past-present connectivity where arts come into play. And the concept of poetry, specifically in poetic archaeology, has been used as a kind of recoverable concept, that it can recover the past in the present, and it's especially in this kind of emergence of romanticism, or the ideas of romanticism. And I have the books, by the way, I have these books for you at the end. You can see them.
Actually, they are in my room.
They are in Marko's room.
You don't
Sorry.
have them.
So the poetic archaeology project and the publication that came out of it was edited by photographer Jan Kaila and Jaapo Knutila, and there are some attempts also to conceptualize the kind of epistemic potentiality of art archaeology, but I think it's not quite exhaustive, or it remains quite on the surface. And there is one like interesting things when it comes to poetics of photography, and especially this aestheticization or romanticization of an object of the past, and how it might be also problematic in the present, so that it's roughly to say, but not only just visually attractive images, but there are some problematics in that as well. And from this aestheticization, maybe Marko takes over now, because he's going to be speaking about disruption, destroying and repurposing objects from the past.
So I think whereas the examples provided by Suvi kind of highlight the very multifaceted and potential, the kind of the vast potential of what art and archaeology can come to mean. And of course we want to remain vague in that sense, because art and archaeology can come to form alliances in many ways. And of course the best way to proceed is by providing examples. But I will start by giving a more specific characterization of, or a description of what an art archaeology might be. And this is not only a very specific characterization, it also comes from one specific person, Professor Doug Bailey, from Professor of Visual Anthropology at San Francisco State University. And in an article from 2017, Bailey writes that art archaeology promotes archaeology as an action that goes beyond the documentation and certification of the human past, beyond the straightforward description, classification, and dating of peoples and past behaviors. So he claims that the archaeologist's job is not to discover officially and tell the stories of the past. Rather, the goal of archaeology is to open people's minds and disrupt received perceptions of society, politics, places, peoples, and material culture. And all of this leads Bailey to contend that to this end, in order to alter people's existing perceptions of the past, art archaeology is an invitation to use artifacts, traces, features, analyses, and perceptions from the past as if they were fresh raw materials, palettes and tools in our creation of original work that has political intention and impact. It is a search for new spaces in which to make work that is both of the past but also wholly in the present. So this leads Bailey to propose what he sees as one possible art archaeological method, or a characterization of what an art archaeological method could be. So it consists of 3 steps: disarticulate, repurpose, and disrupt. And the first step would be the recontextualization of materials by removing them from their familiar contexts, narratives, or assemblages. So you take archaeological materials, you kind of rip them out of their normal, natural context, kind of already disrupt the history and the context that the materials have. And then the second step, reusing of the materials as if they were raw materials, that consists of treating the materials as if they were, let's say, paint, plaster, raw material in any sense that you can imagine. And this creation so you repurpose the archaeological materials in artistic ways with the intent of creating work that has some kind of political power political disruptive powers or capabilities, and the whole point of this is to recontextualize the materials as raw materials in ways that can alter existing narratives of the past. And one example of Professor Bailey doing what he preaches. So I witnessed this last spring in New York, in Syracuse, at the North American Theoretical Archaeology Group conference, where Professor Bailey took a classical amphora and smashed it into pieces and distributed the pieces to the members of the audience to take home with them. And there's also a Facebook page for this, where you can see pictures of people with their shards and doing different things with them. And of course, the whole point of this type of activity is to show that through destruction rather than conservation, you can create new ways of democratizing the past, or creating new meanings that and new memories that may not have survived if the material was preserved according to this preservationist ethos of archaeology or heritage management. So it becomes, art archaeology in this way becomes a mediating, an instrument of mediation between remembering and forgetting. And this type of activity has obvious connections to Ai Weiwei's 1995 dropping of a Han Dynasty urn, in which Ai Weiwei destroys a 2,000-year-old urn as an act of forgetting. So this already shows the kind of the big part or role that art and archaeology can have in this type of politics of forgetting. And the same Ai Weiwei's work was then kind of recreated in 2012 by Swiss artist Manuel Salvisberg. This is a picture by Manuel Salvisberg. It's one from a triptych of 3 pictures, basically identical to Ai Weiwei's triptych. And what you see here is an art collector, Uli Sig, also a Swiss art collector, and he is dropping also a Han Dynasty pot or urn painted by Ai Weiwei with a Coca-Cola logo. So Uli Sig acquired this object through his connections to China. He was a Swiss ambassador in Beijing, and I think he is now retired. But he wanted to kind of sacrifice this urn painted by Ai Weiwei in a pastiche of Ai Weiwei's work. And this kind of politics of destruction has been treated in archaeological literature and literature in cultural heritage studies. And in that setting, this type of destruction becomes also a way of remembering things, and it also connects to the whole issue of preservation and the whole politics of preservation in archaeology. So, and with this, I'm not saying that I promote some kind of destructionist movement or that we should start destroying things, but simply that there might be ways in which things or materials become remembered in ways that are not possible if this preservationist and collection ethos was followed. So, and this, the examples I have given, they are highly political, of course, and they deal with materials that the majority of people would most likely want to be preserved rather than destroyed. And so I want to go to the example from my own art archaeological work. And whereas the aforementioned examples deal with significant materials and highly politically charged materials, with this work that I'm now about to present, I want to ask in what ways we could remember materials that are considered insignificant to archaeology, like materials that we collect at an excavation, but which then go to the trash bin because they're considered unimportant or uninteresting or ineligible by the archaeologist. So this story begins with the San Francisco Trans-Bay Transit Center excavations in 2010 to 2012 as part of this construction for this huge hub of public transportation. Archaeological excavations took place, and as usual, archaeologists there collected a lot of material that was then deemed ineligible, not worth of including in the collections. So these materials would normally go to a dump site, and it was this aforementioned Professor Bailey, who I have come to know from through other contexts. When I met him in Syracuse, where he smashed that amphora, he gave me 700 grams of cow ribs that were collected from the San Francisco excavation sites and construction sites. And the only instructions he gave me was that use these bones as raw material for artistic work. So he distributed materials collected from this site to I don't know how many people, dozens, and so he would not give us any contextual information about the materials. Only the information that these were collected at this Trans-Bay Transit Center construction site. Do whatever you wish with them, as long as it follows his art archaeological method of how does it go? Disarticulating, repurposing, and disrupting. So create work with this material that is artistic, but which has some kind of political message. And so he gave out these materials to people, archaeologists, artists, creators, and And the culmination of this project will be an exhibit in Portugal, opening next week, next Friday, I think, 6th of March, in Santo Tirso, close to Porto. And some of the work that were selected for this exhibition, I think it's 20 or so artistic or works of art or creations. One is here from Alfredo González Ruibal and Álvaro Minguito Palomares, both archaeologists and photographers. So I haven't seen the pictures yet, but so it could take the form of photography like this, sculpture. I think that's bone repurposed as part of a sculpture. Apparently, a lot of bones, but also a lot of shoes were collected at these San Francisco sites, the Transbay Transit Center construction site. And also I have no contextual or background information for this work, but I can already anticipate that it might have a strong political message. And then what I found very intriguing, and I look forward to seeing this work by a French archaeologist, Laurent Olivier. And what I did with my bones, and as you might guess, was lucky enough to be included in that show. What I did with my bones was I cut them into pieces, burnt them in a kiln in 800 degrees centigrade for about 2 hours, and then I ground them into a sand type textured pulver in a mortar. And so this was the raw material that was taken out of its context and reused as raw material for artistic work. And this was the final product. So it's a sculpture, a sound installation. So what you see is a loudspeaker connected to a metal rod connected to a metal plate with this burnt bone on top of it. And I will read before, and there is a video of this. I didn't bring the whole apparatus, but you can kind of get the sense of what this is going for. But I will read to you from my work description what this is all about. And the motivation for this is the fact that I, together with about 2 to 4% of people, hear a constant low droning, low frequency droning sound. And this sound is generally referred to as the hum. So it's a global phenomenon. It has no clear source, and it can be heard at various locations. And usually people hear it indoors at night when ambient noise levels drop sufficiently. And common side effects of hearing this hum include fatigue and insomnia. So so some nights I would get 2 hours of sleep because I keep hearing this low, like a truck idling on the street. So this was the personal motivation for this work. And so research has offered quite a number of explanations for the origin of this hum. some studies suggest that the hum might be caused by certain people's bodily ability to turn radio waves into auditory experiences. Others have proposed that the hum might be caused by ocean waves or tectonic movements, and this would suggest an ancient planetary origin that predates industrialization altogether. So kind of two very completely different kinds of explanations for the origins of the hum. One saying that it's something that people have always, possibly always heard, also in the very distant past, and the other saying that it's a product of industrialization, sound pollution in one sense. So, in drawing from this elusive nature of the hum, this work, which by the way is created in collaboration with sound artist Toni Sigström, aims to draw attention to the bodily manifestations of the hum. So, in wondering whether the hum is simply modern sound pollution or something that people in the pre-industrial past could also hear, this work highlights the human body as an artifact in which the sonic experiences of the past become felt, accumulated and ossified. Kind of a stratification of our soundscapes that is somehow in our bones, so to say. So let's see the film. It's not too long, but we can maybe kind of see what the point is. Okay, so the work will be the apparatus and this video loop in the gallery, or in the museum. This device will not be going on all the time. It's designed to be played maybe once at the opening, and then we will leave on it a nice pattern of bone, and then people can see in the video loop how it operates. So kind of a challenging piece of machinery in that sense too. Okay, so that was my work.
Yeah.
Let's move on to Suvi's things.
Okay. Yeah, but maybe already just to observe on the project that you did, that there starts to be already some kind of glitches in this past-present connectivity, or that the artistic method as a means of recontextualization starts to crack. So there is this possibility of new kind of emergence, or emergence of an object that is anew, surprise, and then the commentary also on the possible present and also future issue. So kind of, I'm not sure if you agree, but there is already a glitch in this, that what the artistic method is for in the present. But yeah, maybe I'll present the work that I did. Maybe I put them here. So 2 summers ago, I was lucky enough to be able to do this project together with documentary film director and cinematographer Peter Jan van Dam. And we worked at the Second World War heritage sites in the Finnish Lapland, and together with Lapland's Dark Heritage Project, Vesa is also part of, we kind of approached the heritage sites in a very field survey-ic manner, and the whole question why we even in the first place went to these sites was that there was this kind of like a book, or book found from the remains of a Finnish dancer called Mirri Karpio, and she worked as a performer during the Second World War in Lapland, and performed and danced for German soldiers, and the book as a kind of archaeological object or archival object drew our attention and placed our bodies into this orientation toward the heritage sites that still are also somehow visible in the landscape in the rural areas. And why I wanted to present this particular project is that when it comes to this kind of notion of an artistic method, when we worked there, we didn't kind of have any preconditioned thought or narrative that how we're going to present and represent kind of these sites or the dancers who worked there. And the whole project tried to stay very kind of fabric-like or fluid, in the sense that there was all kinds of different agents there at the sites that affected both our perception of the sites, but also the way in which we thought that the sites should be narrated in the project or approached. And this kind of hesitation or the willingness to resist a specific preconditioned narration was very strong for us. So it wasn't necessarily that we go with this some kind of image or thought of some kind of visual narrative before we are even there. So at the end of the day, the documentary film became kind of experimental. So the narration of it is very fragmented. It's very shaky. It sometimes even exposes the agency of the camera, that all these kind of weird lights and phenomena appear, and so forth. So in that sense, the kind of art archaeology, that what it is currently or what it could be, I've been thinking a lot about that, this notion of practice-led research, that it's not driven by a pre-given method or a pre-given, for example, a pre-given that this will be a theater piece, but rather it is practice-led. So it's with the archaeological sites, with the past, with the objects, and in one way this is something that I'm currently also interested in, that what this kind of practice-led research could mean in art archaeology space. And then this particular project still, or it's kind of continuing because it's coming soon, this publication.
Yes, I would say as a kind of spin-off of your and Peter Jan's project, and that film was also part of your master's thesis. So your master's thesis was a combination of a written part and then this production part. So as a kind of spin-off of that, you were contacted by the editor of an upcoming book called Heritage Ecologies, which is an ecological approach to heritage sites and this very multi-species type of approach to what heritage is. And it also challenges this division between natural heritage and cultural heritage. And so then you asked me to be part of that article for that book, and it became a photo essay. So last summer we revisited these Second World War sites in the Finnish Lapland, and what we wanted to do was kind of approach the sites not in the manner that an archaeologist or a historian usually approaches them, but maybe as a kind of extended an idea of the sites as as ecologies in themselves, and in that sense the sites are not only ruins of houses and signs of human activity, but also come to be in these very deeply ecological ways in which insects and animals play and mushrooms play a big role in how those heritage sites are today. So the book, and of course Elsa Puolanne, because she
And Mirri Karpio.
she performed there as well.
Yeah.
Because they performed at these sites, they also tie into the story. But we will not go through the story. You can read it in the book when it comes out very shortly, I hope. But there are pictures of ruins as well. But
We chose the.
for this we
Chose not the ruins.
no, there's one picture of a ruin.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Yeah.
this is Kankiniemi site, a prisoner of war camp.
So because Elsa and Mirri performed there, and they were dancers, and they were experiencing the sites in their ways. So part of the project then became to repeat those postures that Elsa and Mirri might have made as part of their performances at the sites.
Yeah, and maybe I elaborate on that the repetition of the postures that came from archival footage of how the dancers, or what speculatively what postures they had while moving or while stopping. The purpose was not reconstruction in the sense that that the narrative of the dancers would have been reconstructed, but rather there was this other layer to it that for example, they assumably didn't perform for prisoners of war, but then again we consciously decided to go to these sites and explore the movements there. This is a frog, common frog, very actually a quite good performer, because Marko took his camera when the frog was there, and it started to expose its body, like in many ways. So it enjoyed the moment. Maybe I'm anthropomorphizing here, but enjoyed the moment of being with the camera. Yeah, and maybe this is something we could leave now while we're continuing discussion. But as a final note, I raised this kind of art archaeology definition that Professor Bailey, that Marko mentioned earlier, has proposed on this website called archaeologies.com. There is a lot of resources, like articles, books there, and projects. So if you're interested, I recommend to visit that site. And the manifesto is my adding. So
not your making, but you're adding in this presentation.
Exactly. So Bailey has written this, assumably, but I added the manifesto word there, because there is something in the rhetorics of this what art archaeology is, that there is this kind of defining critical potential of what is the paradigm of archaeology, what is the paradigm of contemporary art. And then there is this set of proposals of a specific aesthetics or ways in which art archaeology not should but could be done. So it's in a way soft, but it's very wide. So the text is very small, unfortunately. But for example, there is that the art archaeology sphere kind of extends also to institutional critique and forces schedules and logics of publication, or resists also the process of tenure track systems and so forth. So it's quite extending toward different critical thoughts. But also, as a final note, there is this, that art archaeology does not enjoy defining itself. However, I'm a bit hesitant to that. I think particularity and specificity is important in that sense, that how artistic methods and archaeology come into play. So maybe that as a final comment.
Final thought.
Final thought.
Food for thought.
Food for thought, yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Suvi and Marko. Really interesting and indeed different from all our classical archaeological discussions that we had so far. So if anyone has questions or comments, please.
Yep.
Hi.
There.
Can you all hear me? All right.
Not people on the internet.
Yeah, it's for the web.
All right. Hello, Internet. I thought I should introduce myself because I'm not so well known around here anymore. My name's Christopher Tenwald. I'm an American Bronze Age archaeologist, which means I came up through classics and spent most of my younger career running away from art history towards Bronze Age archaeology. And the first part of my career was very traditional. I was a dirt archaeologist and excavated in many sites in Mycenaean Greece and Minoan Crete. And then through vagaries of life and love, I ended up in Finland. And by a strange coincidence, I ended up a lecturer at the University of Art and Design, where for 7 years I developed a program called Human Spaces that did exactly what you're talking about here today.
Okay.
So I know this sounds very selfish, I'm talking a lot, but it loops back to you directly.
Yeah.
When I was first hired by the University of Art and Design, this was in the pre-Alto years, they wanted someone to introduce their artists to classical art history. And I quickly found that just standing up and doing lectures, everyone nodded their heads very politely, but I got the feeling that none of them were really taking anything away of value. So I eventually came up with a system where we did exactly what you two are doing here, and that I partnered with an environmental artist so that we developed a hybrid program. And because of my own interests, we focused on urban archaeology and spatial and material culture studies. And it eventually became 3 parts, where in the beginning I would give lectures on the theory of urban culture and the development through time and so on, lectures that you would recognize in an archaeology department. But then we would go out into Helsinki to spaces that reflected those same themes. So if we were talking about power spaces or burial spaces, we would go to the Senate Square or to the cemeteries. And then after this, we would have an art workshop where I faded into the background and the artist took over and led active workshops where art students, non-art students of various stripes all combined and worked in small groups to develop through artistic methods the same themes that we talked about at first with archaeology. This was wildly successful from the point of view of the students. We eventually had to cap classes at 50 per semester and hold it twice a year. We even had a partnership with the University of America in DC. So if you go hiking on Suosaari towards the north end in the bird sanctuary and see the Kalevala-Keto structure there, that's on the end. That was a result of our workshop, for good or for bad. But what I wanted to say is that those years taught me that what you're trying to do works. It really can have an impact on both fields, and the merging of the two fields can result in a kind of communication of the values of archaeology that we wouldn't be able to otherwise come across. So, in the end we did 12 or 15 projects per semester with a combination of art and non-art students that very much resembled everything that we've seen on the screen here today. The artists never doubted that what we were doing was art. The students never doubted that what we were doing was valuable. Just this past Christmas at Tuominen and Archaeological, one of my old students bumped into me and said, "It was great, I still remember it." The difficulty was convincing the archaeologists that we were doing some kind of archaeology.
Yeah, sure.
And of course, we weren't doing strictly art history theory. We were verging away from spatial and material culture studies. But my feeling was that archaeology was informing a kind of active workshop and using the methods of art to instill those values from what we can only learn about from archaeology, this kind of deep cultural history, in a way that was meaningful and memorable to them. So I don't want to take up all the time. What I meant to say was that this works. So I want to give you some, hopefully some inspiration to keep going at what you're doing. Although that program sadly came to an end because of internal politics, I'm now in discussions with the Finnish Ministry of Education to use the same kind of method with refugee programs here, for instance, to overcome this disjunction of cultures. So it seems strange when you talk about archaeologists wrapping rocks and so on, or artists coming in and disrupting our nice, neat excavations. But a merging of the approaches that play to the strengths of both sides really can have an effect.
Yeah.
So this is what I wanted to say, and I won't take up any more time. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
Do you want to add something to that?
Yeah, it's very. Thank you for the comments, and also for the historical overview, because this is. Once again, that this also maybe through the historical contextualization that was very after 80s onward. This is nothing new, kind of, but still in the field of archaeology is on the margins. So maybe that's the force that kind of keeps this phenomena going.
Yes, and I think also it's seen as, there's this constant battle for resources, of course, in our field, like any academic field. But I remember a couple of years ago, some German friends of mine who I did a workshop with at one of the EAA conferences chased me down and finally convinced me to write an article summarizing this whole program. And during the review process, one of the reviewers said that the only problem I had with it is that I just want to study pots. Why won't you just let me study pots? And I think that what was lost was the point that this isn't taking away from what archaeology should be or changing what archaeologists should do. And I tried to classify it as the practice of a field versus the pursuit. That the practice of archaeology has to stay the same. We have to be this sort of broad tent of science and art that pursues our own goals in as professional a way as possible. But pursuit of a field, the pursuit of archaeology can be something broader, and it can be additive, that we don't have to take away from archaeology because of something new that we want to do. It can add new opportunities.
I just want to say that, you mentioned that archaeologists may not be so sure that this is archaeology, what we're doing, but in a way, at least to me, it kind of comes down to in what ways does the application of an artistic method, for example, what kind of insights can that provide that we wouldn't have gotten if we didn't go that way? So, like, archaeology is really good at borrowing methods from like many fields, and you can say the same about archaeology borrowing methods from geophysics, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's someone would say that's not archaeology. Archaeology is not about gadgets and measuring resistance of electricity and stuff like that. But then I think the important thing is, did the borrowing of that method or the application of that method somehow lead to realizations or discoveries or insights that somehow expanded the field of archaeology in terms of not only knowing more or knowing better, but knowing differently. So it's at the same time it is art archaeology is, at least to me, it is about knowing things that you wouldn't otherwise know, but it's also about shaking the preconceived ideas of what a discipline is or what constitutes a discipline in terms of its methodology.
Yeah, speaking from personal experience, yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, I don't think you.
Sorry, it's the
During those years when I was being forced to change my own perspectives and adopt them to a new way of teaching and communicating what I thought was valuable from archaeology, there was never a time when I learned so much. What did I know about environmental art or different methods and theories of sculpture and painting or graphic design? I was learning at the same time as the graduate students I was teaching were learning. I was just learning different things. So, and in the same way, the artists that we work with learned a lot about how we value cultural information and the depth of cultural information that we can work at, because so many of them operate on the surface of what's only available now, as opposed to addressing the depth of the past. So both sides benefited. It's definitely true that I, as an archaeologist, am a completely different person than the classically oriented dirt archaeologist that entered Taikki all those years ago.
You have been apologizing already several times, but I actually want to thank you, because this is actually the purpose of this seminar, bringing together people in Helsinki who might be thinking about the same things or doing the same things that they just don't know about each other. So your presence here is most welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming. It's really nice. Any other questions or comments? Yes.
It's more like a comment or a reminder. I had, for some reason or other, I had never seen those broken acts of breaking the pots, but I remind me of something that happened when I was just beginning to study. I mean, my first year, and I was doing for the seminar, my second year, but I was doing for a seminar in what you call the Paltsinkuoppa, in below the National Museum. And all those days, our professor was working reconstructing a pot from Säters. And I was watching him. I mean, like I was just a young student, and I didn't want to really be close to him because he would start speaking French to me, and I didn't like that. He thought I spoke French. I understood a little, but I didn't. So anyway, but one day, unfortunately, I wasn't there, but I came. The pot was almost finished, and then one day I came. I was away for a couple of days, and I came again, and where's the pot? Did he finish it? I was told that, yes, he finished it. And he had lifted very happily, I suppose taking it somewhere, and he tripped, and it broke. And then, after that, he got so angry that I started jumping. So, there you have something to think about.
Definitely, yeah.
A meaningful gesture.
Yeah, the element of surprise, definitely there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Okay.
I was wondering, could you elaborate a bit when it comes to the intended audience of art and archaeology or art archaeology, and if the audience is different between when it's like theater archaeology or poetic archaeology?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Thank you. Very, very important question. Definitely, I'm sure it's different, and actually, this question regarding the spectatorship or the perceiver of the work is something that I haven't encountered any very extensive research about what is the public of art archaeology and the public of this specific fields. But since we are humans, and if there are if there is for example performance artists and archaeologists working together, this is just speculation and assumption. I would assume that already suggests some kind of audience of performance art, for example, and also the work itself already suggests some kind of audience. If it's site specific and needs a lot of walking in the forest and entering a space. But I have to say that I don't have like data on this, but I'm sure that the method and the artwork or work of art already suggests some kind of audience. Do you have something you want to add? But it's very
I think I've
question.
come across this question more than once in recent times. What is my intended audience? And it's a so I was asked this at my defense because the work was my dissertation was very much in the space between philosophy and archaeology. So whether I was writing to archaeologists or philosophers, and I think I was always writing to archaeologists in my dissertation, but also I'm not sure whether, for example, the hum. So my dream is that it might be interesting to archaeologists, but a lot of and that's maybe my fear also. This is also my fear that artists may not find it find it interesting because it occupies it's coming from a space where maybe art is not, or artistic expressions like that are not commonplace. So I would say that my audience is archaeologists first. But what kind of archaeologists? Yeah. But I mean, the question of audience. I also like to leave it open in the sense that if, in any sense, we are somehow dealing with a discipline or a field that is emergent of two fields, art and archaeology, then maybe if that field is somehow novel, maybe the audience, maybe there will be novel audiences as well, and that's, I think, is part of the point of doing this as well.
Maybe to add on that the notion that I gave from particularity and this is very crucial also, because I think also your apparatus, the hum, now I'm assuming, and overly simplifying, but there can be also the misunderstanding that art is something that is for everyone. Or it's accessible to everybody, but it's not actually. It's very particular and suggests a very particular audience as well. What the work of art is. Maybe, but thank you, very good question. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. Over the years when we held these workshops, what I found is that one of the best things about these kind of partnerships was that you could tailor your audience depending on what the partnership was. So when I was working with environmental artists, we knew that we had a certain audience who could understand that language, but we also knew that there were people that we wanted to bring in. When you worked in material culture of space, we were working with architecture students. They were very specific in what they wanted. On the other hand, the workshops that those produced could come together to produce something like one of the groups went out to the Finns will know this, the sites of the running graves, they so-called, the trenches, the World War I trenches that go around the Helsinki city.
Yeah.
They're largely abandoned, but one of the students had discovered that there was an account that the foreign workers that were imported by the Russians would come in and sing their songs and have festivals there. Well, they got together old period instruments from Sibelius and held these kind of neighborhood festivals for a while. And surprisingly, people from the community all came and interacted with this. So I think there's a difference between the doing of the thing and the thinking about the doing of the thing.
Yeah.
The doing of the thing can be very specific and have a targeted audience, but the event can draw in other people. And then the thinking about what you did can apply very much to academic fields. Thinking about why in the world we did this can be archaeology, or it can be theory of art, or even the theory of education, for instance, if you're looking at new ways to reach out. So the type of partnership, I think, can focus your audience, but then be prepared to be surprised by who's interested.
Sure, yeah.
Can I add something to Kristin's question, actually? And of course it's related to what you said. So, because I said that the audience could be either archaeologists or artists, and not the bigger audience, or so. That just kind of shows the limitations of my imagination. But so I've never thought of this as a form of popularization of archaeology, if that's what you also kind of might have meant. And there is a sense in which I think projects like smashing an amphora or destroying archaeological materials, it's provocative, and it perhaps only makes sense to a very certain kind of audience. Like it might make sense to an archaeologist who knows the details of the discussions that go on within archaeology about the kind of these oppositions between, like, is art a way of doing archaeology, or is it a form of critique against certain types of conceptualizations of conceptions of what science is, for example. So it might only make sense within a discipline to certain people within that discipline, and it could also make sense, like what Bailey, for example, did with this or the sense in which I presented archaeology as a very political program or political agenda. So it might only make sense within a very specific in the United States, for example, because there is a different kind of history to what we are dealing with in Finland. So that this highly politically charged or the feeling that we get that this is very political, it doesn't make sense, it doesn't belong in our archaeology, it makes sense in another type of archaeology, which might be politically, so the political questions are different. So there is some danger in like taking an action from one context and bringing it to another that might stop making sense.
Yes, I have comments and also question about when you began to talk about politics, and you mentioned that it was Jan Kaila who was together with Jan Fast making exhibitions, and it was from the Second World War, and it's very political issues over there. But then the exhibitions, are they for everybody who are interested in that? And do you believe that there is also the idea that there is art connected with the ideas why these exhibitions have been made?
Yeah, that's also a good question about the role of or the action of exhibiting and exhibition, and already the exhibition is a very it's an institutional practice in its own sphere, and unfortunately that particular exhibition I wasn't able to visit. However, it was a place where potentially something critical might have been in the form of the exhibition. So it's not only objects performed or represented in a very, now I'm going to use this word, fetishist manner, but rather there might have been also the possibility to play with this how things are presented, how things are performed, and do they continue the certain narrative or not about the events, or do they distance us from the events, or do they take us closer, or what do they do? So there was, I think, a lot of potentiality in that, and like also in the Bailey's art archaeology is list the many forms and layers in which both the critical potential but also the potential of novelty exists is tremendous. So it could also be considered that whether the exhibition could have exceeded the norms of exhibition or an exhibition space, which is a white cube gallery space. So do you no? Or do
Okay, someone else? I have a question. Bear with me. Of course, this is a very personal reaction to your presentation. Thank you. And I'm going to go back to your thesis, where you were reclaiming proudly empathy, even though you're a man, and I really liked that. Do you think, or have you, or maybe I'm completely off track, but have you ever thought that these kind of methods of art and archaeology could cultivate empathy towards these sites or objects, or it's like different way of feeling them?
what I have seen, and this is why I say it's my personal reaction, is very human experience that archaeologists or classical archaeologists who are terrified of this kind of things basically reject. Or so do you think that this method could be useful in this way of cultivating empathy, and do the archaeologist community need it or would be useful? Have you thought about this?
In this article, in philosophical terms, we draw so most of the philosophical inspiration for the article, and thinking in ecological terms in this instance. When visiting the sites, much of the inspiration comes from Whitehead, whose philosophy is all about extending our ideas of how it is to feel, so that there's an unlimited number of experiences and modes of feeling, and this particular case for us, or at least for me, it was about intensification of the many modes of feeling. Well, that's a lot of beautiful words, but and of course, when one examines whether this type of project would succeed in eliciting or providing some kind of a ground for thinking differently or feeling differently, or speculating about how it is to feel, or how it is to feel differently from how we feel. I don't know if there is any kind of hard evidence to see how we succeeded, and that's one of the problems of doing something like this. It's not demonstrable in the sense that you have data that okay, now your speculations were successful in that sense, but and going back to Whitehead, this is all. It's also about changing our ideas and changing our concepts and changing or creating new concepts that allow us, maybe perhaps in the long run, hopefully to feel differently or orient ourselves towards other forms of life differently. So it is a huge project. It's a huge undertaking. It will never be finished, of course, but definitely it ties to the topic of empathy.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and also maybe to elaborate on that, the question of orientation, as Marko mentioned already, and how empathy orientates us in spaces and in encounters, and this maybe the intensification of such empathy through thinking with Whitehead, but kind of is a potentiality that already exists. Or maybe I'm a bit hesitant now with this potential word, but it's there. It's a possibility. It's a horizon. But yeah, the question of and how concepts orientate us. Also, the concepts, Marko, last week in your doctoral defense about intimacy, empathy, and so forth. So how these concepts orientate knowledge or knowledge production and so forth.
Okay, any other comments? No, thank you. It was really extraordinary experience. I think all of us, we have some things to think about on our way to Thirsty Scholar. Thank you very much for doing this. It was really, really nice and I think useful. A very nice afternoon for everyone.
Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Okay, so to the Thirsty Scholar.
Yes.